At 46, here are a couple of things that I've learned that seem interesting that I might not have realized as a younger man. New Age alternative, quote, spiritual people are just as messed up as anyone else. This is something that I didn't understand when I got into metaphysics at age 12 and began reading and studying channeled information, is I thought somehow association meant something in evolutionary terms, or in intelligence, or in areas of being a nice person, or more honest, or something better. And in my observation, whether it's observing myself or observing other people, sometimes the nicest and easiest people to deal with are atheists, are very normal, quote, consensus people, and sometimes the most difficult people by far, and I include myself in that assessment, are people with a lot of metaphysical and New Age ideas about how things should and shouldn't be done. Meaningful friendship is one of the most valuable and rarest things to find in Western culture. And the beginning of this is the fact that many people who consider themselves friends or not friends do not know what the other person's definition of a good friend is. Often what friendship boils down to is simply being comfortable with the patterns of energy, the patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, being, and doing of the other person. And as a default, the most comfortable patterns of energy are familiar. And the reason familiar sounds so much like family is that the most familiar patterns are the patterns of our family of origin. However, if you examine closely the yields of well-being per unit of energy invested in our family of origin, you find relatively high investments of energy and often very low yields of sustainable well-being. And so the patterns of energy that produce those low yields will be familiar and thus comfortable, but not very intelligent. Thus, associating with people that have those familiar patterns may feel comfortable, feel familiar, but lead to similarly mediocre results. Trauma and brain operating systems are the single most important thing to understand, and our culture is almost 100% ignorant and fearful in these areas. If we look at the evolution of the species over the last 200 million years or so, we emerge with the reptilian brain, the ancient brain of the crocodile, the fight, flight, freeze protocol of a cold-blooded reptile, of the sociopath, designed to survive. And this brainstem is latent and activated by trauma that is induced and then not repaired. Now, our culture is a master at producing high rates of childhood trauma and not repairing it. And as a result, a large percentage of the population experiences pain at an intensity, helplessness at an intensity, where their transcendent brain, their empathic brain shuts down, and even sometimes the rational brain shuts down. I don't want to think, I don't want to feel, it's too painful. And what's left is the reptilian brain surviving in a sociopathic environment, using sociopathic protocols of fight what is smaller than you, run from what is bigger than you, and freeze when neither of those options are available. This has such enormous implications in the development of the species and the experience of our lives that it deserves a tremendous amount of attention in middle school, in high school, in college, and prior to being a parent. And yet the cult, if one follows cult norms, will take a person cradle to grave without a single formal hour of psychological education, of emotional and traumatic literacy. Culture, which is the initial springboard into self-awareness and coping. Culture will give you language. Culture will give you a recommended diet, teach you perhaps how to drive. The initial springboard into self-awareness and coping quickly becomes a gilded prison, blocking high yields of intelligence, blocking grace, freedom, beauty, grace, and intelligence. So culture launches us rapidly and successfully, maybe into, age 8, 9, 10, into coping. But having propelled us towards successfully coping, culture proceeds to wrap us in a number of veils of insanity, a number of delusions of cult dogmas, a number of prisons, both legal, both linguistic, both in paradigm, and just the norms, the dogma of normalcy, which can cripple and stunt evolution past that point. Chauvinism represents one of the biggest threats to our system of life on this earth. It leads directly and indirectly to cancerous relationships between the species and our host body and our ecology. Because although it's not emphasized in Western cult and Western culture and cultural thinking, the supposedly separate you and me that we're told to focus on stops to exist in a matter of minutes without the constant support of the larger body, the larger ecology that we are innately connected to. Stop the breathing process of trees and plants, and the body is dead in less than 10 minutes. Stop the liquefying process within the body and consuming liquid, and the body is dead within a matter of days. Stop consuming the fruits of the larger body, and again, the body is dead in a matter of days or months. And stop the solar system radiation, etc., and the planet goes to 270 below zero in a matter of hours, and is again, we are rendered dead. And so this idea of the independent, separate, superior identity of the cult ego, of the cult identity, of the individual identity, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, is a very fragile house of cards that is built on a series of lies that cuts the universe in half and elevates the yang, the masculine, and sublimates the yin or feminine side of every polarity. The teacher is deemed to be superior than the student. The male is deemed to be superior than the female. The white is deemed to be superior to the black. The higher is deemed to be superior to the lower. The flower is deemed to be superior to the root. Now, this is utter nonsense scientifically. All you have to do to test the theory is throw out all the roots and try and make a flower out of a flower. Now, if you cannot make white without black, if you cannot create a flower without a root, if a teacher cannot teach anything if there is no student, how exactly is one more or less valuable than the other? They are an interconnected ecology. But this relationship between polarity, between the flower and the root, is intentionally marred within the chauvinism of a dysfunctional cult that's not, in fact, based on science, but on dogma. And it's, it's so flimsy, and yet it is so normal. And this mass hysteria, this mass delusion, is a tremendous threat because by elevating, for example, the mind over the body, by elevating money over the people who make and invented money. It's a very bizarre thing. I thought the golden goose and the golden egg narrative was to point out that if golden eggs are valuable, then geese that lay those golden eggs must be more valuable than the egg. Because without the goose, there is no egg. Without the human being, there is no money, for example. And so a cult that values money more than it values the people who make the money is insane. Having children is a really big deal. And almost all of us are completely unprepared for it. Again, the normal defaults that we will kind of dip into, learned from our family of origin, are incredibly dysfunctional. They're very poorly thought out. You look at the statistics of intergenerational abuse as just one example. And you can look at those statistics, and if a doctor said, here, have this drink, it has a 33% chance of poisoning you, we'd say, what do you mean? You call yourself a doctor? Get out of here. Give me something that has a 95% chance of doing well. Well, when a parent in an intergenerational abuse dynamic has a child, that child has a 33% chance of being abused in this way, of experiencing this type of trauma and pain, of dealing with these types of body symptoms. And yet we think nothing of bestowing the lineage, the heritage of our dis-ease, of our ignorance, of our fear, of our chauvinism onto helpless infants that are the future of the species. And it would be highly intelligent for parents to be required to do a minimum of a month's preparation in data before becoming a parent. Data relevant to the well-being of their child and the risk factors of that child in a given family system. Most people are basically empathic, but become sociopathic in environments of systemic scarcity relative to human needs. So Abraham Maslow did some great work in uncovering the hierarchy of human needs to survive, to feel secure in that survival, to develop a sense of love and belonging, to develop self-esteem. And I diverge a bit from Maslow here to talk about the need to develop one's unique talents, to learn from the ecology that is innate to each individual. Because when nature produces dandelion seeds, when life regenerates through seeds, as the environment changes, the seeds mutate to be more and more successful with the new environment, or that species goes extinct. Now, we are part of nature's overwhelming success protocol. We came out of nature, we depend on nature, we are nature. And life or nature has a great track record. According to the current narrative of the day, and these narratives have been changing over the last 100,000 years that we've been somewhat conscious, there have been more than 10,000 cults or cultures, and every one of them has had a narrative. They've had a story. How did we begin? What's our purpose? What are we doing? How do we relate to one another? Some have stories about great serpents, tying in with the reptilian brain. Some have stories about the goddess. Some have stories about punishing gods. Some have multiple gods. Some have the one God. You have a range, in fact, 10,000 different stories, different cults, different cultures in human history, and everyone has a story. Now, our story, and it's worth remembering that 95% of all the stories in human history, of all the cults, are extinct, meaning they failed. And this is particularly noteworthy because every single one of those cults, the Egyptians, the Siamese, the Atlanteans, it doesn't matter what the cult and what time in history or what the language, every single cult teaches its children the same thing. Do it our way. Our way is the best way. Our way is the right way. Our way is the normal way. Do it our way, because that's the way things are done. And of course, around the globe at different points, other children are all learning the exact opposite. And it's remarkable to realize that of the 10,000 cults estimated to exist as sustained dogmas for a period of time, 9,500 of those cults are all extinct, which means, given the statistics, that our cult, whatever it is that it's saying, has a 95% statistical chance of being wrong, of being looked at 1,000 years from now as, what were those fools thinking? Why did they eat this way? Why did they talk this way? Why did they think this? But anyway, in that context, the earth, or I should say life or nature, created the entire universe, according to the current narrative, out of less than the size of a pea. There was this, and 25 billion years later, there's you, there's me, there's all the other people. There's more than 1 billion planets capable of hosting our version of life in our solar system alone, in our galaxy. And it's like, that's a lot of success, isn't it? I mean, if you had a bank account, which over 25 billion years started with less than 1/1,000,000th of a penny, it is now trillions upon trillions upon trillions of sustainable diversified assets, you'd be considered the greatest investor of all time. And nature has taken this and sustainably, meaning, if nature had made a single mistake in 25 billion years, then her whole asset collection would have collapsed, right? The whole portfolio of planets and stars, if nature got a little bit of gravity wrong or this, it would all vanish. And we'd never exist to be able to have this conversation. And so nature is an incredible winner. And nature produced the reptilian operating system to survive in a reptilian and sociopathic environment. And nature produced the rational brain to develop advanced pattern analyzing ability that would allow us to predict the future. It would allow us to look back at the larger ecology out of which we emerge and try and understand it, try and make cohesive patterns and see how they're relating to one another so that we can succeed at meeting our needs. And we have the needs to develop our unique talents. And if nature is to be trusted, then the uniqueness that emerges in an individual psyche is mutating to respond to the uniqueness of the ecology around it, is providing medicine for the imbalances and advancing the species. And so an intelligent cult nested in an intelligent species that has a long runtime in nature's infinite curve of excellence, because nature doesn't have an ego. Life doesn't have an ego. Life is energy that diversifies into more and more distinct form and then creates enormous probability and possibility fields as those different diverse energies relate to one another, creating yet more uniqueness, more diversity. This is nature's winning hand. It's her winning game plan. Create something, divide it, relate those diverse parts together, create new alternatives that didn't exist before, and then do the same with them and the same with them, such that nature becomes more and more complex with each new million years. Now, nature's only been around for 25 billion years, according to the current narrative. Where will she be in 1 trillion years? How about 1 trillion years? And of course, in that time frame, it doesn't really matter what happens to our star, to our solar system, because nature is endlessly iterative and creative. Nature believes in winning. And to be guaranteed victory, if you want to get a lucky 7 and you're rolling dice, don't roll with 1 dice. It only has 6 sides. You can't get a 7 with that. Don't roll with 2 dice. How about 1 billion dice? If you've got 1 billion dice, 1 trillion dice, one of them's going to have a 7, a 2 and a 5, a 1 and a 6. You're going to get success somewhere, and that's going to springboard outwards. One of those billion planets in our solar system alone, in our region of the galaxy, one of those billion planets that is affirmative of life is in the next 1 trillion years going to not only learn intelligence, as we might think of it, but is going to develop a sustainable relationship with its host body. And what of all the rest? You see? No energy is created or destroyed, according to physicists. It just gets recycled. We have 100 years on this planet. Our body goes back and fertilizes the plants that have given us this time. And something new happens, something new happens, something new happens. Moving towards complexity, moving towards grace, moving towards intelligence, the efficiency with which energy is transformed into sustainable well-being. That's life, that's nature. And we can learn from our mother, our host, because she's operating on a 25 billion year winning streak, starting with this. Now, I don't know about you, but most of the data says if you want to learn how to win, if you want to learn how to be good at something, learn from the best. Well, I don't know any other thing other than life that has taken something this small and made multiverses that are so big that we cannot even know all that we don't know. It's that big. And it's just getting started. Again, where will life be in 1 trillion years? Who knows where this species will be? Who knows where this planet will be in 1 trillion years? But life across universes will be infinitely more complex, will be infinitely more graceful, will be infinitely more intelligent than it is today. And we get to be part of a failed experiment, of being one of the iterations that doesn't work and then get recycled back into the cosmic mind and come out again in 1 billion years, the energy recycled. Or we get to be participants, pioneers, with the technology of conscious minds, of identities, to see where we might go. And one of the things that nature does is produces uniqueness, unique talents, the ability to deliver unique value in every human being. And we have a need to discover what that is, to discover our talent and to bring it abundantly, valuably into the world so that there is more access to resources, more access to abundance than there was before. We have a need for that. To discover it, to develop it, and to bring abundance into our own lives and into the lives of others through bringing that talent into community. This is a need. And many of us have not met that need. And finally, we have a need, an innate need to be part of something transcendent, part of something bigger than ourselves, to not be an ungrounded dead end, but a flow point, a corridor, moving towards a larger organism, to go back to the ocean out of which we emerged. And these are our needs. When you have dysfunctional, low intelligent, low grace cultures, you have large percentages of the people who are just in survival, or maybe they've got to materialistic security. They've got more things than they need, but that's all. They don't have love and belonging. They don't know what it is. They don't have self-love. They don't know what adult love is. I know what the child's love is. The child's love needs. Every child legitimately needs. It's and projects parent on everything else. The child needs. I need you. That's love for the child. I want you. I desire you. That's love for the adolescent. But what's adult love? What does it mean to be loving? as an adult, not just taking lust or need, but to love oneself and another. And so in incompetent cultures, such as our own, where a very high percentage of the people lack basic human needs. There are millions of Americans, for example, that do not have a single solid, meaningful friendship. A single solid, meaningful relationship with another human being of any kind. They were born needing that. They still need that. But the cult has conspired to obfuscate that technology, to emphasize numerous traits, perhaps acquiring money, perhaps acquiring houses, whatever, but not creating and sustaining meaningful relationships. We don't even know how to do that. Well, that's a low level of competency. Now, when we have a cult that does not fulfill or provide a conscious and elegant path to fulfilling all of our human needs, not preferences, our needs, to have love and belonging, to develop self-esteem. Again, many of us don't know what that is. And if we do know what it is, we don't have high amounts of it because we don't teach the technology of generating self-esteem. We teach the pseudoscience, we teach some mythology, we teach the lecture, get some self-esteem, but we don't teach the technology of building solid self-esteem, as evidenced by the fact that everyone needs it and many people don't have it. They don't have it not because they don't need it, but because no one around them modeled how to do that. Nobody taught them. Nobody gave them feedback. And they didn't know how to learn that. They didn't know how to create a model. So we have very high levels of incompetency. Now, the more we have needs, a separation from our needs, the more we long for those needs. And that's called pain. Separation from and longing for something we need, it's called pain. And incompetent cultures produce high levels of pain. High levels of pain become unbearable to the empathic and the transcendent regions of the brain. It's just too painful to be in pain and feel other people's pain. So the transcendent brain shuts down and we cease to be aware, usually by the time of language, of our interconnectivity with one another. And high levels of empathy are again too painful when we and those around us are in high levels of chronic pain with no path out of it, so we shut down. Now we're in the reptilian brain. The more pain, the more the empathic and transcendent brain shut off, the more the reptilian brain kicks in. Because scarcity in an incompetent environment surrounded by reptiles demands reptilian protocols of fight, flight, and freeze in order to survive those environments. So it's incredibly important to understand the linkages and to start measuring our own and other people's human needs. Where are you? Are you in survival? Are you certain, do you have security of survival? How fast are you dying? Our homeless are dying at a rate of 8 hours a day per person. A homeless person who's homeless for 24 hours loses 8 hours of human life. That's a third. So they're not even at solid survival. Everything that is human can easily be iterated to be 10 times more effective, 10 times more intelligent than the status quo. The prison system, the education system, the government, the voting system, the transportation system, the model of working, the paradigm of the cult, chauvinism as a dogma, the degree to which we learn to think. It doesn't matter what it is, the diet, the media consumption habits, the mental routine, the identity, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that you and I use as an operating system. Every single thing created by human beings can easily be 10 times more effective, 10 times more intelligent than the status quo. Most people, we all have a hierarchy of deities that we bow to. We pray and bow to deities with our money, with our time, with our behavior. We know what is the single most important thing to a person by what they do with a 24-hour period, because every single person does with their day the thing that is most important to them. Every single person does with their dollar, with their money. They spend their money based on their values, not what they say their values are. You'll have plenty of people talk about, family values, and they'll sit down and watch porn for 4 hours, and that was their time with family, right? You look at what people do, what people say, what people think, how they spend their time, how they spend their money. This is prayer. This is the most meaningful form of prayer. And we all pray to a hierarchy of deities, of values. And at the top of most people's value, in a pain-based, shame-based scarcity cult, is the fear of pain. So pain's at the top. And in scarce cultures, in cultures of induced scarcity, in other words, in incompetent cultures, because you have to understand that there is an abundance of time. There is an abundance of energy. There is an abundance of resources. Now, there may not be enough time and resources for every human being on the planet to have a 9-story mansion and 48 Ferraris and all of this. But those aren't needs. Nowhere in the hierarchy of human needs does Ferraris show up. The hierarchy of human needs is to survive, to feel secure in that survival, to experience love and belonging, to develop high levels of self-esteem, to discover one's unique gifts and develop them, to submit to nature's plan, to life's plan, which is to be uniquely talented for something valuable, to bring that value out into the world, creating abundance, and then to become part of something bigger than ourselves. These are the human needs, and there is 1,000, 1,000,000 times over the amount of energy and natural resources on the planet for every human being who's ever existed to sustainably meet all of their human needs. And in doing that, there is no pain. Pain is the separation from and longing for, the need for our human needs, amongst other things. And so when we create an incompetent culture, one of nature's many experiments that may die out, we create high levels of pain. Now, every infant who's born into unbearable amounts of pain in dysfunctional families has, at some point as they start learning language, a very important fundamental thought. Never again. I never want to feel this way again. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to feel this helpless. I don't want to feel this alone. I don't want to feel like I'm surrounded by sociopathic morons ever again. I don't want to need someone who lets me down again and again and again and again and is so incompetent they don't even grasp what they're not doing to meet my needs in a helpless state as an infant, as a child, as an adolescent. And so this bottom line, in a scarcity environment, I never want to feel this way again. Well, this leads to the fear of feeling that way again. And the fear and the pain both exist and move into the future projections rationally, based on the equation that says, I never did want to feel this way, but I did. I couldn't stop the pain. And the same world that created that pain is still around me. i.e., I'm likely to feel that pain again and I'm afraid of it. So the fear of pain becomes the highest deity to which many of us pray. I would help this person, but what if I ran out of money and no one helped me? Then I would feel this horrible pain, so I'm not going to help this person. I would tell the truth, but what if she left me? And then I was all alone and I felt humiliated and lonely, so I'm going to lie to my partner. We pray to the highest deity, which in many cases is the fear of pain, the fear of death, the fear of being out of control, the fear of humiliation, the fear of loneliness, fear of being betrayed. And so a tremendous amount of our energy is bowing in money, in time, in attention to the fear of pain. Now this is where transcendence, this is where initiation, this is where enlightenment. To be enlightened is to transcend the fear of pain. To no longer be afraid to die. To no longer fear the larger body that we are a part of. To no longer believe in the illusion of separation when we are so deeply connected with the underlying ecology. And to no longer fear being cast out of a cult that is afraid of the truths which transcend its dogmas. And instead, to stop separating ourselves from our authenticity, from ourself, out of the fear of being cast out from the cult for being true to life. Because life made us unique. Life did not make us a copy of the cult as an exact replica, because all evolution stops with that protocol. I mean, life created everything out of something this small. Do you think life did that by playing it safe? Do you think life did that by making every single thing the exact copy of this? If life had done that, there would just be lots of little peas. Maybe every 1,000 years, nature would take the pea and turn it into an exact other pea. And there never would be anything different. There never would have been nitrogen or helium or anything else. There'd just be this tiny original thing, because we wouldn't want to make a mistake, right? But nature makes infinite varieties, and if you invent the idea of a mistake, then nature makes infinite numbers of mistakes. Knowing that somewhere in all of that infinite, She just needs one lucky 7, one successful result to the continual timeless experiment, because nature's got tons of time. She's not afraid to fail. This planet doesn't make it? Oh well, in another trillion years, another one's bound to. Let's create some more. Let's create some more. And so this iterative abundance, this is life. But cults are very frightened of change and tend to attack and marginalize their minorities because they're different, because minorities that are different confront the majority with the fear of the unknown. And the fear of the unknown ties in with the ultimate deity. I never want to feel that way again. How do we stop that from happening? Well, let's just make sure that we don't change anything. Then life will stay very small and predictable. We won't introduce too many variables. Everyone who acts differently is a new variable. It's uncontrollable. I don't like it. So we have the cult dogma and the fear of pain in tension with life's abundant algorithm of grace. Paradigm, followed by beliefs, is so effective as a mass hypnosis that it is almost impossible to wake ourselves and others up from the dream of our paradigm. As soon as you create a paradigm, now you exclude everything that doesn't fit into the paradigm. We call ourselves capitalists. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to make money. And suddenly we find our entire population spending most of its energy trying to make money just by defining oneself as a capitalist. What if one had defined oneself as a humanist and spent the same amount of energy ensuring that we and everyone around us had high levels of survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, knew their talents and developed them, brought abundance with those talents into the world, and were part of something bigger? At any rate, the paradigm and the beliefs that support the paradigm and the beliefs that are born out of the paradigm consist of a mass hypnosis, a mass dogma. And the conscious mind simply cannot grasp the paradox and the complexity of all that is. All paradigms, all beliefs are ultimately hypnotic dogma. You can find plenty of evidence to support any belief. You can find plenty of evidence to counter any belief. You just have to look. The universe is big enough that no matter what position you hold, you can find a perspective that says that that position is good or bad, presuming that you've introduced the hypnotic paradigm of good and bad. Once you introduce the paradigm, then from one angle, everything is good, and from one angle, everything is bad. But first, you have to invent the paradigm of good and bad. One has to descend from the garden into the knowledge of distinction, into the knowledge of good and evil. In a guilt and shame-based paradigm, where mistakes are punished, the primary agenda is hiding truth, which leads to insanity. Because from one perspective or another, just about everything could be 10 times better. Just about everything is a mistake. And if mistakes are to be punished, if ignorance is to be humiliated, then who we are and our reality must be hidden to protect ourselves from the shame and punishment of the sociopathic dogma that is the status quo. When you are constantly in a project, in a protocol of lying, of hiding, of burying, of masking parts of ourselves in reality so that they will not be shamed, punished, and cast out. You then end up insane, because the equation of reality is ecological and is interconnected. If a bookkeeper who understands that they will be fired for presenting certain results to the boss starts deleting certain receipts, certain expenses, so that it looks like the business is more profitable than it is, then everyone else has to go insane who believes the numbers over the reality. If you look at a piece of paper on an Excel sheet and it says you have $29 million and you go to the bank and they say you're overdrawn $200,000, you have to go insane to believe the lies. Now, the lies are primarily created by omitting data, omitting truth, omitting data, so that you can't understand how this became this, because there's a missing bit of data in between. If you have 2 plus 2, you can understand where 4 came from. But if one of these 2's is politically incorrect, let's say someone says it's boring. 2 plus 2, that's too boring. I'm going to delete this 2. And now I'm just going to say 2 equals 4, because it's more interesting. People like it. It's more snappy, right? Well, this is political correctness. This is cult engineering. This is lying. But it leads to insanity, because 2 does not equal 4. And one person is asking everyone to believe that the other 2 doesn't exist for social reasons. And as long as we punish and shame and ostracize those who do not fit into the status quo, we will incentivize and create massive amounts of lying, often delusionary group lying, and this will produce high levels of insanity, as we do and as it does. This life, this reality, is the most powerful, magical, wonderful, and sustainable pattern of energy that I can possibly imagine. As dysfunctional as the government, as barbaric as the prison system, life has created everything that we can possibly imagine and more in a blink of an eye. Not a blink of an eye from a human perspective, because we're very small in relationship to the size of the multiverse, to the size of the universe, to the size of the galaxy, the solar system, this planet, this country. We're very, very small. And in relationship with something so vast, time seems very, very long when we talk about 25 billion years, because the aperture, the consciousness is so small that it has to note one nuance bit by bit by bit, second by second. But much like the phenomena of a DVD player that takes 2 hours and 37 minutes to spiral through 750,000 images to create a movie, the laser is tuned to a very small scale. and in doing so creates a 2 hour and 37-minute experience by showing one image and then another and then another. But the entire movie is there at the very beginning on the DVD. We just don't have a lens. We don't have a laser big enough to grasp every single image simultaneously. And much more importantly, our conscious mind cannot look at 750,000 frames simultaneously and grasp the narrative. But that's a limitation of consciousness and computing power. There are artificial and computer and lasers that can do that today, that can glance, copy the entire movie, and create another copy in a matter of a few seconds, because they can grasp the whole pattern and copy it. They're just not humans that are conscious. But what of that consciousness that can grasp, that has a big enough lens and a big enough computing power to grasp the entirety of everything in all time and all space simultaneously, such that there is no time? It just is. And what about the slightly smaller consciousness, where a universe gets created every second with a whole range of probability fields? 1 trillion years is not a long time for an infinitely vast pattern of awareness. And whether that pattern is aware through language or through felt experience or through existence, whether the nerve ending of consciousness is existence itself, whether it's a distinct consciousness framed in contrast, or an ecological consciousness framed in connection. We're in the middle of a great creation. And in our little part of that creation, when we look out at life and when we look out at human development, iteration, evolution has 3 steps. The first step is sympathy. This is the 0 to 7 period of a child. They eat what you eat. They learn the language you learn. They copy. They smile when mom smiles. They attune to the cult with unconditional sympathy, with unconditional surrender. You move 7 to 14, you're moving into synthesis, or you're moving into antipathy, the rebellion of the adolescent. This is the critic, where a healthy adolescent will note and count and measure every single thing that's fucked up with their parents, that's fucked up with the cult, that is wrong here and dumb here and boring here. That's the job of an adolescent, to go from unconditional surrender and adoption to unconditional and extreme rejection and rebellion of the status quo. Now you have polarity in consciousness: acceptance and rejection, complete acceptance and complete rejection. And the adolescent's job in the iterative process of human evolution is to accurately note and pin down everything that's wrong with the cult. That's their job. So that as they move into the 3rd state of the adult, the 3rd state of synthesis and of synergy, you can have something intelligently unique and intelligently iterative. Because you can't go directly from complete acceptance and obedience and sympathy with all that is to change and doing something new. Why would you change something? If you look out at the world and from cradle to adulthood, you say, every single thing my parents did was perfect. Everything my government did was perfect. The entire world is absolutely perfect. Then there's no reason to change anything. There's no reason to experiment. There's no reason. You just do exactly what everyone else has done before because it's already perfect. You have death. That's not how life works, though. In order to get to the creative, iterative stage, you must rebel. You must go into antipathy. You must reject the status quo. Now, in the extremism of destructive and self-destructive adolescence, money's dumb. We're not going to do. We're just not going to do any money. Food, this is processed. The water has chlorine in it. Just throw it all out. The whole thing is fucked up. Just go into the forest and never speak to another human being again because they're all completely fucked up. And it's completely true. It's just that's not how iteration happens. So, at some point, as the adolescent tries to live without any money and be an environmentalist without a car, and, at some point they realize, how am I going to get my environmental message across? If cell phones are bad for your health and, I've got to convince other people, I've got to use a cell phone, they want to be paid, okay, I've got to use money, So the adults... the adult's role in evolution is to take the best of what is and throw out the worst of what is and use the best of what is and the knowledge of the worst of what is to create something that has never existed before, a new model. A new iteration of life. This is to submit to what life has done for the last 25 billion years. You see, most of life's species are now extinct. Most of life's cultures are now extinct. Most human beings are now extinct. In a broader scale, most of the planets that may have once had some form of this or that of life may no longer be planets. Nature and life are constantly evolving and growing and iterating. And the goal is to do more with less. Because if you do less with more, consume more and more energy, then pretty soon the universe doesn't exist. If you consume more and more energy and matter for lower and lower yields, then the entire universe shrinks down and disappears. But if you do more with less, where you create more and more sustainable human well-being with less and less time, money, natural resources, electricity, energy. When you create more and more grace, where you don't have to fly halfway around the world and study in university for 18 years and then do this hard thing and then buy all these things so that you can do here and then drive to here just so you can do this one thing so that you can be happy. That's very inefficient. Where you can transmit, where you can generate grace, well-being, a sense of survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, unique expression of talent, bringing that talent abundantly into the world and becoming part of something bigger than ourselves in your own community. You can go off and do those other things, but you can do it abundantly in every community on the planet that's more intelligent. It's more graceful. It takes less energy, but produces higher yields. There are people that have traveled around the globe, myself included, 10 times, but have not fully met all of their basic human needs. And there's people staying right in their neighborhood that have never left their county and again have not sustainably met their human needs. We're on an iterative journey. Sympathy, to learn the current dogma, the current cult, the current status quo. To rebel and find fault, to understand everything wrong with the status quo. And then take the best of the status quo, the resources generated by that status quo, to create a new model that yields 10 times more sustainable human well-being per unit of energy invested. That's surrendering to life. That's how nature, that's how life created everything we can imagine and so much more out of less than the size of the pea in almost no time at all. Or, from a human perspective, in 25 billion years with another trillion or so in the pipeline.